Thank you. The following is one of my voiceover demos. If you're a voiceover artist and you would like to advertise one of your demos on my podcast, please send an MP3 to thedrill12, all one word, at gmail.com. That's thedrill12 at gmail.com. Back in a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Caesar's Palace for 12 rounds of boxing. In the red corner, from Los Angeles, California, wearing the red trunks with the gold trim, weighing in at 125 pounds, the lightweight champion of the world, Danny Little Red Lopez. Well, Bill, our winners get a home theater receiver. That's right. Experience the full potential of high-definition video with this 72-channel digital home theater receiver from Yamaha. But wait, that's not all. They also get a 5.1-channel surround sound system from Mirage. With 5 palm-sized speakers and a compact subwoofer cube, the MX 5.1 brings you huge immersive sound with Mirage's omnipolar technology. All from the Spiegel catalog, Chicago, Illinois, 60609. And they're taking closer order as down the stretch they come. Mr. Hot Stuff has 3 lengths to make up with chocolate candy last. On the rail, take the points behind that gallant son with chocolate candy gaining on the outside. In the lead is Pioneer of the Nile being tackled by chocolate candy. They're neck and neck as they come to the wire. And Pioneer of the Nile holds off chocolate candy and wins the Santa Anita Derby. And now, on your feet, time to greet holder of 14 NBA titles, your home team, your Los Angeles Lakers. Number 3 at 6'8", 5th year out of UCLA, playing forward, Trevor Ariza. Starting at center, number 17 at 7 feet, 4th year out of St. Andrews High School, Andrew Bynum. And at guard, number 24, 6'6", 13th season out of Loyal Marion High School, Kobe Bryant.
About this guy, he did 30 years in jail for something he didn't do, and they finally found out and let him out. And I was happy for him. But let me tell you something. If I do 30 years in jail for something I didn't do, when I get out, I'm going to do something. That's 30 years credit, you know? I've already done the time. Now it's time to do the crime. Feel me?
Good morning. It's Monday, Talk Radio Monday, August the 12th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer, the patriotic song of the day, and the headlines, we will have patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and Talk Radio's America. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Lift up your hands, ye heroes, and swear with proud disdain. The wretch that would ensnare you shall lay his snares in vain. Should Europe empty all her force, we'll meet her in array, and fight and shout and shout and fight for North America. Torn from a world of tyrants beneath this western sky, we formed a new dominion, a land of liberty. The world shall own we're masters here, then hasten on the day. Huzzah, 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 for free America.
Thank you. And now, headlines with Stuart Barney.
Oh, what a difference from last Monday. The news is no white-knuckle heavy selling so far today. Modest gains pretty much across the board. The Dow looks like it's up about 50, S&P 11, NASDAQ also up about 40-odd points. The NASDAQ will have more on the markets in just a moment. Politics, that looks different from last Monday as well. Kamala Harris is on a roll. She's copied Donald Trump's plan for no tax on tips. She's promised an economic plan maybe this week. She leads by 4 points in 3 swing states, that's Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And a new poll in the Financial Times suggests she is now beating him on the economy. That used to be his strong suit. The honeymoon continues. Donald Trump seems uncomfortable. He's arguing about crowd size, suggesting Harris's numbers are inflated by AI, and he's again reduced to crude name-calling. President Biden told CBS that he dropped out because he didn't want to be a distraction for his party. Fellow Democrats pushed him out of the campaign, but he's still the president. He looked frail and halting in the CBS interview. Key numbers on inflation coming this week. This affects rate cuts, when and by how much. That depends on what the Consumer Price Index tells us a little later this week. In advance of that, interest rates are close to where they were Friday. The 10-year around 3.95 at the moment, and the 2-year just over the 4% level, 4.07 actually. Bitcoin moving to $59,000 a coin, 59.7. Oil moving up as a clash between Iran and Israel looks imminent. The U.S. is speeding the arrival of another aircraft carrier group to the Mideast. Hezbollah fired 30 rockets into Israel overnight. Gas, no change. $3.44 is the average for regular. Diesel down 1 cent at $3.75. Gold strong at $2,482 an ounce. All right, on the show today, a spectacular closing ceremony for the Olympics. Tom Cruise rappelled into the main stadium, jumped on a motorbike, and miraculously traversed the globe to Los Angeles, the site of the 2028 Games. In 1984, the LA Games made a profit and boosted California's image. Can LA 2028 do the same? We'll figure it out. Monday, August the 12th, 2024.
And so there you get an example, by the way, of the confusion of news, commentary, and analysis. It's all blended together there in his headlines. He makes commentary about Donald Trump, saying that he's making some sort of crude remarks. I'm not sure what he's talking about. But anyways, let me reassure you, Mr. Varney, that crude remarks or not, he's still vastly more popular than Kamala Harris. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, cars.
And there it was. White on white on white. 1988 35th anniversary Corvette. Little chubby 9-year-old Rob standing in the showroom at Abraham Chevrolet. Just looking over it, and the salesman let me sit in it. And I told my dad, this is the coolest car I've ever seen in my life. Fast forward 25 years. I'm on the radio. And I put a bounty out. The nicest, lowest mileage 88 35th anniversary Corvette, period. I get a random message on Facebook from a guy I have no idea who it is. The Chevrolet dealership in Nashville has a 1988 35th anniversary Corvette, and they want it for $69,995. It was sold new July 1st, 1988 at Abraham Chevrolet. This is the car that I looked at, that I sat in when I was 9 years old. I paid him over PayPal for it. That's how excited I was. Transporter gets there, he goes, goes, this Corvette don't look like something you'd want. And I said, just load the damn car. And this is the car that got me loving Corvettes. And it found me. After all these years, I found that car. The car that was sitting in the showroom at Abraham Chevrolet is sitting in my showroom now.
What is up, guys? I film a ton of cars, but what I'm going to show you today is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. So in the car industry, right before a vehicle is unveiled, they put a wrap around it to hide the details of it before the official launch of the car. And now you can get a production car that's very close to that. This is the RS e-tron GT Project 513/2. Yes, it's quite the name, but you get these really cool decals. You're going to have black rims here. You're going to have carbon fiber there, carbon on your roof, the same red accents as the prototype. You're going to have Project 513/2 etched in your glass, and for the first time ever, red Audi rings. You have red accents on your seat, red seat belts, carbon fiber inlays with the same camo graphic. You're going to have red accents down here. You're going to have a head-up display, digital display, a leather and suede wheel with red accents on top, and it's going to say Project 5132 on your armrest. But the biggest news is that there's only 75 being made, and it's only for the U.S. So if you like this, but you don't have $179,000 or extreme pool, you can always get the car cover.
And one of our new employees was named Nick. So we bought this Victory motorcycle. The motorcycle got delivered to the dealership one day. Nick wasn't going to ride it home. So another one of the employees that was more familiar with motorcycles said, hey, I'll move it inside. I'm on the phone actually trying to buy a Bugatti Veyron for a customer. Screech, bang, crash outside. This other person had started the motorcycle, gotten it running, and was about to move it inside. And Nick said, hey, let me just sit on it, rev it a little bit. He had started to make the thing move, dropped the clutch, and launched himself about 20 feet directly into the back of a Porsche Panamera that we had in inventory. And Nick had broken the back glass with his unprotected face. Stay right there and stop looking down, because he was tilting his face down to watch the blood drip out. So I run him up to the emergency room. And so this guy comes in and he spends 3 or 4 hours stitching up Nick's face. He opens up one little flap and an ant walks out. But Nick did well, got his stitches, got fixed up. Now, face looks great. All that we have to remember it by is a story like this.
You got a car here? I said, I sure do. So I got a little green Corvette sitting over there. So she gets in the car with me and we go out riding around. We go bar hopping in Indy. Grab my duffel bag. As soon as I walked out into the lobby, there stands my buddy. He goes, where in the hell you been? I said, long story. He said, I got a 64 GTO bought that I want you to drive back. And he told me, he said, what'd you drive up here? I said, I drove a little Corvette up here. What Corvette? I said, the green C4. He pulls a manila folder that was on top of the dash out. There's no VIN plate on it. He said, I bought this at the salvage sale. This car's parts only. It doesn't have a title, a VIN, anything. This car was being deported. And he said, you drove this car all the way from Greenville, South Carolina to Indianapolis, Indiana. And then all the other places that he didn't know about. Needless to say, that drive home in that Corvette, 10 and 2, about 60 mile an hour, just cruising. And that's the last time the little C4 Corvette ever went on a road trip. But a very memorable trip and one more fun C4 Corvette story.
LB7 Duramax, the oil pan sludge was unbelievable. Let's tear it down and find out what kind of damage that caused. I've got all these bent push rods here, tearing this down, and you can see where the valves have hit the top of the pistons. You can see the marks here on the pistons. So I'm looking for one of my pins. They're famous for the crank being sheared off. That ain't it, but it's sheared off in the cam. And that little pin is all that holds that cam gear. There's the rest of the broken pin right there, and you can see where it just fractured and sheared right off. All our Monster Engine rebuilds, we get rid of these pins in the cam and the crank, and we install a keyway in there so that keyway now fits right in that groove. Instead of that crappy little pin that obviously not a good thing. If you're getting a motor built and you're getting one from GM, don't put a keyway in there. I think you're wasting your money. Get it built right.
And that was Cars. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the patriotic shorts.
Thank you, sir. Listen to this.
Now enjoy this fun photo collage of some of your favorite stars and politicians who speak about the need to reduce our carbon footprint, but who are always on private planes. That's right,
Bernie
all
Sanders.
of them. If you don't see a celebrity's picture here, it's because we weren't allowed to use it. Or their series got canceled. But all the environmentalists of Hollywood and Washington do it. Their position on climate change is We must do more to stop pouring carbon into the air, except for me when I want to go somewhere and then I take a private jet. It turns out there is one thing in this world that is completely impossible to resist, and this is it.
On October 26, 1997, USS Abraham Lincoln detects a vessel off the coast of Spain. Both ships were heading towards each other. The supercarrier got a message on radio. Kindly change your course 15 degrees to south. The carrier replied, you reroute your course 15 degrees to the north to avoid collision. But the unknown ship repeated the same words. This time, the carrier's captain replied, change your course to the north. The unknown ship replied, no, you better change your course. The captain then became a little serious and said, this is the captain of USS Abraham Lincoln. We are the U.S. Atlantic Fleet's second largest warship. Change your course right now to 15 degrees north. Otherwise, I would do anything to protect this ship, as we are guarded by 5 destroyers, 2 missile cruisers, and 2 submarines. After a little calm, reply comes, we won't move a bit, because we are a lighthouse. It's your call. The carrier replied, okay, got it, thank you.
It was fun for me to watch these guys work and realize, like, oh, this is what this looks like when guys have autonomy, when guys are moving and responding to the enemy. Like I said earlier, you can do all the right things in the world, the enemy gets a vote. But when your guys have autonomy and trust to maneuver to contact as fast as possible, you're responding before the enemy can keep up. And so I saw us all just move as this collective element, the flow. And it was one of those things like target was secure, everything was done, and I'm looking around like, I guess that was it. Like, this is not at all like what the movies make it out to be. Now, there's always ops that don't go as planned. And it ends up being on your heels a little bit, but most of them, I find that we have such tactical patience, and our guys know what to do and when to do it, and they're so fluent in that language. Half the time, they felt bad for like our adversaries or enemies because they wouldn't know what hit them. You could see them like getting their kid on, thinking they're about to get in the fight. They don't know they're already dead. We had to beat on them before they even decided. We were just waiting for them to make the decision. Bad choice. That's hostile intent. They had no idea.
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little bit of motivation.
You're going to lose sleep. You'll doubt whether it'll work. You'll stress to make ends meet. You won't finish your to-do list. You'll wonder whether you made the right call and have no way to know for years. This is what hard feels like, and that's okay. Everything worth doing is hard, and the more worth doing it is, the harder it is. The greater the payoff, the greater the hardship. If it's hard, good. It means no one else will do it. More for you.
My biggest fear, honestly, was, let's say this. Let's say, I don't care if you believe in God or not. I don't care. So let's just play a game with me. Let's say you're God. And we have a big, long line of people. And I made it to heaven. I'm 75 years old. I'm 300 pounds. I made it to heaven. I worked for Ecolab my entire life, spraying for cockroaches. That's what I did. But I'm dead. I'm in heaven now. And you're judging us all now. So we're in line. We're all sitting there in line. You have Adam Brown. He has a big board up, and you're talking to Adam Brown about his life. And you rip it down, and I'm next in line, David Goggins. I see my name, and I see all this, and God goes, hey, you say, read this, man. And I'm reading this list, and I'm seeing 182 pounds, Navy SEAL, Ranger School, motivational speaker, changing lives. Okay, man, pull-up record, all this. And I'm like, that's not me, man. And God looks at me and says, that's who you were supposed to be.
Hard work actually works. And with virtually everything. It might not make you the best at whatever it is you're pursuing, but it will certainly make you better than you are. We're built to walk uphill. And when you reach the pinnacle of the hill, you want to stop and appreciate the vision. But the next thing you want is a higher hill in the distance, because it's the uphill climb that it's from the uphill climb that we derive our value. And I mean this technically. So almost all the positive emotion we feel, especially the emotion that fills us with enthusiasm, and that's to be filled with the Spirit of God, by the way, because that's what enthusiasm means. That's experienced in relationship to a goal.
You're lazy, you know exactly what to do. Exactly what to do. Because even me, in my state of, I can't read or write, I knew exactly what to do. It just sucks doing it. It sucks to do it.
I think a hopeful message that anyone can think about who's in that hard period or in that start period is that it won't get harder. Like, this is the hardest part. And so if you can just make it through this, everything else is downhill. It's not that the things that the dragons you're going to slay aren't going to get bigger. They are. But you become so much more equipped to slay them back.
So when I was growing up for like 3 years, so from the time I was 8 to the time I was like 12, we lived in a $7 a month place. And what I call it is I'm always paying rent in that $7 a month home. Every day of my life. I go back and revisit that place. Because that place made me this good animal. That place made me this hard man. And then from that place, so that place is hard work. That place is going back to the fundamentals of life. The fundamentals of what made David Goggins. Going back in there, going back to the library of David Goggins, studying even more of what I know, taking that out, going back to where I'm at now, and then moving forward.
Difficult things make regular life less difficult, because regular life can be confusing, and little things that go wrong and little problems that arise are exacerbated by the fact that you're not accustomed to dealing with hardship.
And it ain't going to come overnight. You're going to take a beat, you're going to take this, you're going to get knocked out, you're going to get up, and you're going to see if you got the right thing. But you got to work hard.
I think any person, any human realizes that if you want some kind of a good outcome, you're going to have to work hard for it. And if you don't work hard for something, you're not going to get an outcome that's really worth much. There's things that you can control. There's things you can't control. Now, I will tell you that human beings can control a lot more than they think they can. And oftentimes people say, that's not my fault. There's nothing I can do about that. And more often than people think, there is something you can do about it.
You play the game with zero sleep. Zero sleep. Zero sleep. It's like, kids, Natalia had a certain, health situation or what have you, and you're staying up all night, and then you got to go out and perform because fans don't know, teammates don't know, nor do they care, nor should they, that you've been up all night. You got to perform, right? And so you just got to go to work, man. You got to lead by example. If you want your kids to do whatever it is they want to accomplish in life, you have to show them. Mm-hmm.
Guys,
you have to show them. Mm-hmm. You can't. You got to show them. And that's what I tried to do.
Those early days, that little trench winning in the weeds, oftentimes gives you these huge advantages later on because you have more context than anyone else. And so rather than lament them and hate the fact that you're going through it, remembering that these will be arrows that you put in the quiver that you're going to be using to slay the future bigger dragons.
I find that consistency is the key.
Yeah.
And consistency doesn't always guarantee success, but if you're inconsistent, if you don't take those steps, you'll never be successful.
This world we live in is tough. It's tough. It will beat you down. The world and the life that we live in is the ultimate competitor. It will try to take you out. It will find your weakness, and it will just hammer you.
The advice I would give to my 20-year-old self would be to work harder. Even when it feels like the work isn't mattering, it will matter. Delayed does not mean denied.
Motivation is a feeling that comes and goes, and it doesn't matter whether it's there or not. Discipline is infinitely more important. So no matter how you feel, get up and do what you're supposed to do. That's it. And that's discipline. It's not motivation. If you only did what you were supposed to do when you were motivated to do it, that's leaving it to chance. But if you're disciplined, you go do what you're supposed to do. That's the way it works.
What's more beneficial, in fact, can serve as a tremendous amplifier on all endeavors that you engage in, especially hard endeavors, is to, A, not start layering in other sources of dopamine in order to get to the starting line, not layering in other sources of dopamine in order to be able to continue, but rather to subjectively start to attach the feeling of friction and effort to an internally generated reward system. And this is not meant to be vague. This is a system that exists in your mind, that exists in the minds of humans for hundreds of thousands of years.
You're here to live, not to sleep. And the problem with the vision of Mai Tais on the beach is that, well, first of all, that's a vision of drug-induced unconsciousness. Second, it's only going to work for about a week. Third, you're going to be a laughingstock in a month and depressed and aimless and goalless. That's not. You want a horizon of ever expanding possibility.
When you can learn to do things when you don't want to, when you don't feel like it, when you're tired, when you can learn to push yourself to do them, that's when the world opens up to you. That's when success knocks at your door. But if you can't, you'll never succeed, because I guarantee you there is some guy out there who's working when he's tired, who's working when he doesn't feel like it, who's working when he doesn't want to, and he's going to outwork you.
No matter how much you improve, no matter how much you change who you are, it's not permanent. You just wake up and say, oh my God, man, you're David Goggins. You break records. You do this, you do that. People want to know, how are you able to just be so hard? I never turned the thing off. Because once it turns off, I go right back to the David Goggins that is. And that's the guy that I'm constantly fighting every day.
And that was a little motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Daily Stoic.
Fear is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Many are harmed by fear itself, and many may have come to their fate while dreading fate. Seneca, Oedipus, 992. Only the paranoid survive, Andy Grove, a former CEO of Intel, famously said. It might be true. But we also know that the paranoid often destroy themselves quicker and more spectacularly than any enemy. Seneca, with his access and insight into the most powerful elite in Rome, would have seen this dynamic play out quite vividly. Nero, the student whose excesses Seneca tried to curb, killed not only his own mother and wife, but eventually turned on Seneca, his mentor, too. The combination of power, fear, and mania can be deadly. The leader, convinced that he might be betrayed, acts first and betrays others first. Afraid that he's not well liked, he works so hard to get others to like him that it has the opposite effect. Convinced of mismanagement, he micromanages and becomes the source of the mismanagement. And on and on. The things we fear or dread, we blindly inflict on ourselves. The next time you are afraid of some supposedly disastrous outcome, remember that if you don't control your impulses, if you lose your self-control, you may be the very source of the disaster you fear. It has happened to smarter and more powerful and more successful people. It can happen to us, too.
And that was the Daily Stoic. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Think of Franklin Roosevelt, the young Roosevelt, from this distinguished political family. And then he begins this glittering political career as a young man. He's assistant secretary of the Navy, and everyone's predicting, governor and a president. It just seemed the most natural path for this brilliant young man that charmed everybody he ever met. Then, polio and paralysis. And Roosevelt, by all accounts, fell into years, even decades-long depression, self-pity, a sense of fruitlessness and hopelessness. His mother largely encouraged him just to retire. But what made him the great figure that he was? Yeah, to a degree, his positive qualities, he kept those all his life, but the compassion that was born of his struggle with the thorn in the flesh. Where you stumble, that's where you dig for treasure. The Lord says, my grace is sufficient for you, because in your weakness, my power reaches perfection.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, the proper functions of government fall into three broad categories, all of them involving the issues of physical force and the protection of men's rights. The police, to protect men from criminals. The armed forces, to protect men from foreign invaders. The law courts, to settle disputes among men according to objective laws. Unquote. That was Ayn Rand from The Nature of Government from the book The Virtue of Selfishness. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now the 33 strategies of war.
The friendly takeover. In the summer of 1929, André Breton, the 33-year-old leader of Paris's avant-garde surrealist movement, saw a private screening of a film called Un Chien Andalou. It was directed by a Spanish member of the group, Luis Buñuel, and its first image showed a man slicing open a woman's eye with a knife. This, Breton exclaimed, was the first surrealist film. Un Chien Andalou generated excitement in part because of the contribution to it of a new artist on the scene, Salvador Dali, a friend and collaborator of Buñuel's. The director spoke highly to Breton of his fellow Spaniard, whose paintings, he said, could certainly be considered surrealist, and whose personality was supremely peculiar. Soon, others too were talking about Dali, discussing what he called his paranoid critical method of painting. He delved deep into his dreams and unconscious, and interpreted the images he found there, no matter what their content, in delirious detail. Dali still lived in Spain, but Breton was suddenly seeing his name everywhere he went. Then, in November 1929, the 25-year-old Dali had his first major show in a Paris gallery, and Breton was transfixed by the images. He wrote of the exhibition, "For the first time, the windows of the mind had opened wide." The late 1920s were a difficult period for Breton. The movement he had founded some 5 years earlier was stagnating, its members constantly bickering over ideological points that bored Breton to tears. In truth, surrealism was on the verge of becoming passé. Perhaps Dali could offer the fresh blood it needed. His art, his ideas, and his provocative character might make surrealism something people talked about again. With all this in mind, Breton invited Dali into the movement, and the Spaniard happily accepted. Dali moved to Paris and established himself there. For the next few years, Breton's strategy seemed to be working. Dali's scandalous paintings were the talk of Paris. His exhibitions caused riots. Suddenly, everyone was interested in surrealism again, even younger artists. But by 1933, Breton was beginning to rue his inclusion of Dali. He had begun to get letters from the Spaniard expressing great interest in Hitler as a source of paranoid inspiration. Only the surrealists, Dali felt, were capable of saying pretty things on the subject of Hitler. He even wrote of sexually charged dreams about Hitler. As news of Dali's infatuation with the Führer spread within the movement, it provoked a great deal of argument. Many surrealists had communist sympathies and were disgusted by the Spanish artist's musings. To make matters worse, he included in one enormous painting an image of Lenin in a grotesque pose, exposing oversized buttocks, 9 feet long, propped on a crutch. Many in the surrealist group admired Lenin. Was Dali being deliberately provocative? After Breton told Dali he disliked this rendition of the human buttocks and anus, a delirious profusion of anus images suddenly began to populate the artist's paintings. By early 1934, Breton could stand no more, and he issued a statement, co-signed by several members, proposing Dali's expulsion from the surrealist group. The movement was split down the middle. Dali had both supporters and enemies. Finally, a meeting was called to debate the issue. Dali had a fever and a sore throat. He came to the meeting wearing half a dozen layers of clothing and with a thermometer in his mouth. As Breton paced the room, listing the reasons for his banishment, Dali began to take off and put on his overcoat, jacket, and sweaters, trying to regulate his temperature. It was hard for anyone to pay attention to Breton. Finally, Dali was asked to respond. "I had painted both Lenin and Hitler on the basis of dreams," he said, the thermometer in his mouth making him spit many of his words. Lenin's anamorphic buttock was not insulting, but the very proof of my fidelity to surrealism. He continued to put on and take off clothing. "All taboos are forbidden, or else a list has to be made of those to be observed. And let Breton formally state that the kingdom of surrealist poetry is nothing but a little domain used for the house arrest of those convicted felons placed under surveillance by the vice squad or the Communist Party." The members of the circle were perplexed, to say the least. Dali had turned their meeting into a kind of surrealist performance, both making fun of the creative freedom they advocated and claiming it for himself. He had also made them laugh. A vote to exclude him would only confirm the accusations he had leveled at them. For the time being, they decided to leave him alone. But in the meeting's aftermath, it was clear that the surrealist movement was now more divided than ever. At the end of that year, Dali disappeared to New York. Word came back to Paris that he had completely conquered the art world in America, making surrealism the hottest movement around. In the years to come, he would actually emigrate to the United States, and his face would grace the cover of Time magazine. From New York, his fame spread far, wide, and around the world. Meanwhile, the surrealists themselves faded quietly from public view, marginalized by other art movements. In 1939, Breton, disgusted by his lack of control over Dali, finally expelled the Spanish artist from the group, but by then it hardly mattered. Dali himself had become synonymous with surrealism, and it would stay that way long after the surrealist movement had died.
And that was the 33 Strategies of War. Back in a minute. Thank you. So if you're a Democrat, you should vote Republican because there are things that don't disappear. Violence is one of them. Modernity is not distinguished by an aversion to violence. Violence is simply protean. It varies its outward form according to the social constellation at hand. Today, it is shifting from the visible to the invisible, from the frontal to the viral, from brute force to mediated force, from the real to the virtual, from the physical to the psychological, from the negative to the positive, withdrawing into the subcutaneous, subcommunicative, capillary, and neuronal space, creating the false impression that it has disappeared. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, this is from Friday, August the 9th. It's Varney and Company. A little bit of news and Stuart's My Take.
What a step out down the Champs-Élysées from the Arch of Triumph to the
They're playing this music because I'm about to opine on the Olympics. Bonjour, Paris. Fred Astaire. The greatest dancer of all time, in my opinion. You don't even know who he is.
I know who Fred Astaire is. There's several dance studios named after him.
Oh, okay. All right.
One right in my neighborhood.
You've got to watch that guy from the 1930s and 40s. It was a fantastic guy. It is 11 o'clock Eastern Time. It is Friday, August the 9th. The markets are now showing some green. Not as much as yesterday, but no red at this moment in time. Don't know how we're going to close. Dow's up 30, Nasdaq up 25. Have a look at big tech, please. That's a mixed picture. Most of them are up. Amazon, Apple, Microsoft up. Nvidia, Alphabet down. The yield on the 10-year Treasury has been falling this morning, retreating from that 4% level. You're back to 3.94 on the 10-year at this moment. Now this. The Paris Olympics are almost over. I think they've been a wild success. So much so, they may have resurrected the Olympic movement. Last time around in Tokyo, the entire event was upended by COVID restrictions. But in Paris, the whole city became the backdrop for the world's greatest athletes. I think it worked. There were the inevitable controversies, the mockery directed at Christianity in the opening ceremony. That was tasteless and offensive. The organized disruption of the train system just as the game started. It was disturbing, but its impact was minimal. Gender confusion in the women's boxing event, that made brief headlines. And the Belgians, they took their team out of the triathlon because one athlete got sick swimming in the River Seine. But the athletes and the city transcended it all. Who's going to forget the incomparable Simone Biles or Katie Ledecky or Noah Lyles taking the bronze in the 200 meters when he had COVID? Every 4 years, we get to see sports that we only see every 4 years. I don't spend much time watching table tennis, synchronized swimming, men's field hockey, or women's pole vault, but I enjoyed them all this time around. And then there was Yusuf Dicek, who turned up to his air pistol shooting event without almost any equipment. With one hand casually in his pocket, he shot his way to silver, a star overnight. There have been many questions about whether hosting the Olympics is worth it. It's very expensive, and when they're over, the host city is often left with a pile of debt. To me, Paris was worth it. Okay, the French have to bear the debt, but to me it was worth it. Not just financially, but to establish the Olympics as a global event that can work if done properly. In 2028, the Games will be held in Los Angeles.
So who paid this guy for such a gushing, what amounts to a promotion? There's nothing about this that is objective. I mean, here you've got, again, the Seine River that's polluted so badly it makes people sick. You've got the mockery of God and Christianity, the disruption of the train service, and then he calls it gender controversy. No, gender is grammar. This had nothing to do with grammar. This was a sexual controversy. And more specifically, it was allowing men to fight in a women's boxing tournament. Okay? So what it comes down to is, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how'd you like the play? Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of Tucker Carlson.
So the 50th anniversary of Richard Nixon's resignation as president is in August. Nixon was, by some measures, the most popular president ever elected. And then into a second term, he was gone and lived the rest of his life in a kind of disgrace. Is everything that we think we know about Watergate true? In retrospect, it looks very much like a kind of coup against a sitting and enormously popular president. Was it that? Well, there are very few people still around with their faculties who can answer that definitively. Jeff Shepard is at the very top of that list. He graduated Harvard Law School in 1969 and went immediately to work at the White House as a White House fellow and remained there through the entire Nixon administration.
Anyway, so what he's doing here, he says, he was in disgrace, he left in disgrace, and was this perhaps a coup? Why would he think that? The first question that I ask myself because immediately my conscience is telling me something's wrong here. And what I immediately realize what's going on is that Tucker Carlson refuses to accept the status quo. Right? That's the way we would do things. We make the presumption for the status quo. The status quo is that President Nixon was involved in a Watergate break-in. He didn't have apparently direct knowledge, but the people that worked for him had direct knowledge of this and participated in this break-in in order to get intelligence information or whatever on the Democrats, okay? And then he lied about it, and eventually he was pressured because he was on the verge of being impeached. And so the Republicans in the House and Senate went to him and said, it's best for the country. What they really mean is best for the party, but best for the country if you resign. And so he went ahead and resigned. So he resigned under pressure, which is tantamount to a confession, which is, yes, he's in disgrace. No coup. Nobody did a coup. Everything is exactly as it appears to be. He was a crooked president, and by today's standards, maybe not so bad, but still a crooked president who left office and should have left office. In a manner of speaking, you could say at least he had the decency to resign. Now, from a strategic, tactical standpoint, again, I've said never resign under pressure, because then it sticks to you like glue, and he shouldn't have. Really, he should have gone ahead and go for the impeachment, defend yourself. If they go ahead and throw you out of office, then, again, you can always then come back later, and then you can make the Tucker Carlson argument that there was some kind of a coup afoot. But when he resigned, that's it. That is tantamount to a confession that he was a bad guy, that he screwed up, and that he was no longer fit to hold office. But Tucker Carlson won't accept that because it's not popular today. Today, the presumption is always made for change. That's why you have so many conspiracy theorists afoot. And that's what Tucker Carlson is. It's disappointing. Tucker Carlson is a very shrewd, very intelligent guy, and he's right on about a lot of things. But his conspiracy theory stuff it's just got to go. He's got to quit with this. It's silly. It's ridiculous. It makes him look bad. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if that's the reason he ended up leaving Fox. That Fox let him go because he's just too much of a conspiracy theorist. And conspiracy theories are always about skepticism, about nobody knows anything with certainty, and the refusal to make the presumption for the status quo. A refusal to accept things the way they are. So, and that gets you nowhere. You just end up going in circles. And that's what Tucker Carlson is about to do in this particular situation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now we pick up where we left off with Talk Radio's America. The chapter is called Disgruntled but Still Loyal Unless You're a Moderate.
Democratic leader for 12 years. Levin's analysis demonstrated the enduring power of the double standard narrative in the minds of hosts and listeners. Rather than address politically thorny issues of racism and gun control, the narrative kept listeners focused on the supposed hypocrisy of Democrats and journalists. This consistency in hosts' rhetorical leadership reflects both the cohesiveness and the insularity of what Kathleen Hall Jamieson and Joseph Capella call the conservative media establishment. They argued in 2008 that Limbaugh, Fox News, and the Wall Street Journal editorial page formed the heart of that establishment. Today, the conservative media establishment is broader. There is no sinister cabal. Conservative media personalities did not meet in a war room to plot political strategy. Rather, they consumed each other's work. Talk radio hosts read conservative digital sites and publications during commercial breaks, and as they prepared for their shows, Fox News hosts listened to conservative talk radio during their commutes. Many top conservative talkers, including Limbaugh, Hannity, Bortz, and Levin, were friends who communicated regularly, sometimes even sending each other digital messages as they broadcast. In the echo chamber of the conservative media establishment, various outlets reinforced and amplified the same message, while insulating that message from rebuttal by Democrats or the mainstream media. In particular, this message sidestepped Democratic attempts to stratify voters along economic lines and instead defined the political battle as one between conservatives and a godless, patronizing liberal cultural elite who threatened socially conservative values and common sense ideas. In this way, conservative media personalities gave their listeners a common enemy. That common enemy, in turn, was crucial to establishing and sustaining a group identity. As Jameson and Capella discuss, conservative talk shows also harnessed emotion to bond their audiences together and distance them from the enemy. Thus, more than a decade after Limbaugh, Liddy and their fellow early hosts had taken to the airwaves with testosterone-fueled bravado, hosts were still up to the same tricks. In late 2002, Limbaugh dubbed Massachusetts Senator and presidential hopeful John Kerry Lurch Kerry Heinz and Mr. Big Ketchup, suggesting that he was stiff, robotic, and dominated by his wife, ketchup heiress Teresa Heinz. One goal of such emasculation was to humorously convey the Republican message that Democrats were weak on crime and national security. When it came to Democratic women, talkers flipped the script, often portraying strong liberal women as shrill. On one 2005 show, Hannity introduced comments from then-Senator Hillary Clinton with Helen Reddy singing, "I am woman, hear me roar," overdubbed by Clinton screaming. Conservative hosts wielded three critical rhetorical weapons to encourage listener support for Republican candidates and causes: priming, framing, and inoculation. Priming involves elevating the importance of one decision criterion over others. For example, a host seeking to undermine a candidate might highlight her unpopular position on abortion rather than her popular position on health care. Or a host might talk about the part of a bill he was most upset by, instead of its most well-liked provisions. Media frames, following Jameson and Capella's definition, are organizing structures that tell audiences what the issue is through the use of selection, emphasis, exclusion, and elaboration. They affect the likelihood that particular options will be selected by the audience. Talkers framed issues by challenging facts that supported Democratic claims and policy proposals, while sharing information that bolstered conservative assertions. Essentially, they argued that the pro-conservative points were the only ones that should matter to voters' decision-making. Limbaugh, for one, routinely presented and then rebutted charges that could damage conservatives. As they demonstrated in the Lott case, hosts' truest rhetorical arrow continued to be inoculation, which took the form of consternation over a miserably biased mainstream media. By fostering distrust of journalists, hosts could protect listeners against the doubts that might arise from reporting. This was, of course, a long-standing trope. Conservative media activists dating back to the 1940s had routinely slammed journalists for liberal bias. Conservative politicians, most notably Vice President Spiro Agnew in the late 1960s and early 1970s, often joined the pylon. Modern talk radio hosts level this charge in their usual fun manner, branding mainstream and avowedly liberal media outlets and personalities with snarky, derisive nicknames in an effort to discredit them. Limbaugh called MSNBC PMSNBC. Again, the opponents of conservatism took the form of a shrill, angry woman. Not to be outdone, Levin painted the network as the delusional MSLSD. He nicknamed the Washington Post the Washington Compost. Limbaugh reminded his listeners that the mainstream media were boring and inaccurate. U.S. News and World Report was U.S. Snooze. Meet the Press was Meet the Depressed. And ABC News' Sam Donaldson was Sam the Sham. The distrust sown by talk radio diminished listeners' willingness even to consult mainstream media sources. Hosts' decades-long assault on the Fourth Estate laid the groundwork for the rapid rise on the right of the concept of fake news. Long before the term was coined, and then co-opted by Donald Trump, talk radio was equating mainstream media and fake news in the minds of conservatives across America. The media bias frame proved especially important during campaign season, with Democrats and Republicans hurling nonstop claims and counterclaims. Voters needed neutral arbiters to ferret out the truth. Talk radio hosts portrayed themselves as just such arbiters, while dismissing the mainstream media as hopelessly unfair. Between September 5th and November 1st, 1994, Limbaugh discussed some form of media bias on 7 episodes of his television show. Given that he had 6 times as much airtime on radio as television, he likely discussed the theme significantly more with listeners. The same thing happened in the run-up to the 1996 presidential election. Jameson and Capella found that between September 3rd and November 11th that year, Limbaugh attacked the mainstream media 52 times and reframed its reporting 58 times. All these rhetorical weapons, priming, framing, and inoculation, served to rally talk radio listeners behind Republicans and help the party win the ideas war. Using data from the National Annenberg Election Survey in 2004, Jameson and Capella found evidence suggesting that audiences for Fox and Limbaugh are more likely to accept Republican claims and reject Democratic ones than the audiences of other media sources. In short, in the Bush years, talk radio was working for the GOP. Democrats sour on talk radio. As Republicans worked with talk radio and reaped the benefits of the medium's political might, Democrats turned away. Over time, most, but not all, Democratic members of Congress gave up on talk radio. Democrats instead focused on media outlets that were more likely to reach their core audience, outlets that also offered a better chance to spread their message as they designed it, not a version of that message distorted by hostile questioning from a conservative host. Exasperated Democrats did for a brief moment attempt to support a liberal counterweight to conservative talk. During the second half of George W. Bush's first term, several private companies tried to do liberal radio in a big way. They wanted urgently to improve liberals' media infrastructure, which had fallen far behind the competition. Liberals lacked dedicated advocacy outlets and lagged conservatives in other areas, such as think tanks and media monitoring. Liberals' sense of marginalization — Democrats were completely out of power in Washington — lent further urgency to these efforts and fostered on the left the sorts of conditions that, on the right, had proven ripe for exploitation by radio entrepreneurs. Liberals also felt poorly served by the mainstream media. As they saw it, on the media's watch, an election had been stolen and the country had committed to an unnecessary war in Iraq. Liberals were looking for media that explicitly aired their frustrations. Randy Rhodes, one of the more successful liberal hosts, summarized this sentiment during her May 4, 2004 program, when she accused the media of being bought off and paid for and a wholly owned subsidiary of the White House. She lamented, "I didn't see anyone in the media who sounds like me." This fury provided a fertile climate for liberal advocacy media, much as the needs of dejected and alienated conservatives provided opportunity for Limbaugh in the late 1980s. Senator Democratic leader Tom Daschle and Senator Byron Dorgan became boosters of private liberal radio efforts. They had spent years trying to get their side heard on talk radio. They were successful disseminating a Democratic message using the infrastructure they had created, but results in the commercial market were more mixed. So they were supportive when upstarts came offering a new strategy, and they worked to build the cachet of local liberal hosts in hopes of getting them into national syndication. Senate Democrats even fundraised on behalf of one of the new liberal radio organizations. But few other leading Democrats joined Daschle and Dorgan, and results were, again, middling at best. Democratic donors and political leaders never truly prioritized these efforts, in part because they hated what they heard on the radio. When Daschle encouraged leading Democratic funders to invest in liberal talk, they declined, lamenting the vacuous and poisonous nature of the medium. Liberal radio entrepreneurs similarly ran into a wall when they tried to recruit financial support. This was a major blow, because investment was crucial to overcoming the structural obstacles liberal radio confronted. Thanks to conservative radio's years-long head start, liberal radio was left with low-wattage stations and budgets too small to pay for serious promotion. Of course, those disadvantages hadn't stopped Limbaugh in his early days, and despite the skepticism among Democratic elites, several liberal hosts, including Rhodes, Ed Schultz, and Stephanie Miller, did find a degree of national success. But the boldest liberal radio gambit of the early 2000s was a catastrophic failure, furthering the left's view that talk radio was permanently infertile ground. In 2004, the hugely ambitious Air America radio network debuted amid much fanfare and celebrity involvement. But the network quickly ran aground for reasons wholly unrelated to its ideology. They included poor and ever-changing management, grossly insufficient resources for a hugely expensive undertaking, a constantly changing programming vision, and inexperienced hosts. Hosts also were paired in teams without first developing any chemistry or really working out the kinks in their shows. While ideology wasn't the reason for this flop, liberals responded to Air America's travails not with a new radio strategy, but by shifting resources and energy to other media. In particular, liberals reached out into the growing digital world. Politicians and other Democratic leaders found that appearing at a blogger conference such as Netroots Nation, formerly Yearly Coast, or joining a conference call with bloggers produced a far better response than a liberal talk radio call. As time passed, Democratic staffers and strategists concluded that cable television and social media also offered larger audiences than liberal talk radio. The internet and cable outlets need not have served as substitutes for talk radio. Indeed, for most Democratic strategists and staffers in the early to mid-2000s, outreach to talk radio and the internet weren't mutually exclusive. Even after Howard Dean's 2004 presidential campaign sparked Democratic investment in online infrastructure and communications, talk radio outreach continued at a fairly high level for a few years in both houses of Congress. Right before the 2006 midterm elections, for example, House Democrats hosted a radio day, during which they did more than 80 interviews on various outlets. Nonetheless, the option to go online did lessen the perceived need to invest in talk radio. Talk radio had had two primary selling points for Democrats in the 1990s. The opportunity first to target messages to local audiences, and second, to circumvent the mainstream media and speak directly and interactively with Americans. Over time, however, digital communications performed both of those functions, especially the latter. In fact, the internet was an even better outreach tool than talk radio, at least for the left. It finished what talk radio started, a progression toward pure, unfiltered messaging from politicians to their constituents, enabled by new media. The internet was taking off just as talk radio's utility in achieving this goal was seriously declining, thanks to national syndication. A national show wasn't a good conduit to local audiences, and in many places, nationally syndicated shows filled the majority of the programming day. Even if liberals were wrong to believe that talk radio was somehow inherently a conservative medium, they were right to see that, in the era of syndication, the internet offered greater potential for voter targeting and interaction. Democrats had sensed this potential in the 1990s. After President Clinton's final State of the Union address, he fielded questions from the public online. The president also did a live internet town hall and became the first president to do Christmas shopping online. In 1996, the president's communication director, Don Baer, conducted an internet chat from the White House in conjunction with the launch of MSNBC. The beauty of it was there was no talk radio host to steer this contact between Democrats and citizens. Not only were many spots on the internet unguarded by gatekeepers of any sort, digital messaging also evolved to be much more precise than talk radio. Online services could target voters exactly and generate concrete response rate numbers. If a radio show reached small parts of 5 House districts, it was less useful than an online system that could target users district by district. This was possible by the second half of the 2000s. And YouTube, Facebook, and other online tools enable staffers to track the impact of their media campaigns with real, if imperfect, data, and eventually learn many details about the audience reached. By contrast, when a member...
And that was the second section of this particular chapter, Disgruntled but Still Loyal, from Brian Rosenwald's Talk Radio's America, How an Industry Took Over a Political Party That Took Over the United States, read by Christopher Grove. Just remember how all this started. It started with the New York Times. New York Times decided that it was going to go ahead and editorialize its front page, much to the chagrin and the dismay of its readers, and it was Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity et al. That decided to respond in kind. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.